We also can discuss the High Renaissance. The High Renaissance gets its name from this idea of it being the best, sort of the pinnacle creation of Renaissance objects. And it's mainly centered in Rome and takes on a lot of patronage from the church. So we're kind of moving a bit from Florence to Rome, and again, looking more what the Pope is doing to commission artwork. We'll start out by looking at Leonardo. There's really sort of three main Renaissance artists we talk about, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael. And you'll notice I don't call him Leonardo da Vinci. And the reason why is because da Vinci, all it really means is of Vinci. So it's really just a way of designating which Leonardo you were talking about at the time, because it was a popular name. So really, to me, da Vinci is just a sort of describer he used, and definitely isn't his last name. So, on tests, sometimes people will say, Da Vinci did this. I'm like, well, it's really not his last name. So again, I just prefer to call him Leonardo and leave it at that. He was ever seeking knowledge. He was so interested in learning. When you study about Leonardo, you realize this was a very passionate man who, to him, learning was everything. And he was also a bit obsessive about everything he did. And so you'll notice the quote I give you here from him: art is never finished, only abandoned. And so he had a wish to have perfection. And if you've ever heard the phrase, perfection is the enemy of the good, it's a way of trying to say that sometimes perfection, you get caught up in it, and you did something perfectly fine, but you just couldn't let it go. And so you never finished it. Leonardo didn't have a lot of finished works for this reason. So the artworks we show you, they're actually very special because he had a hard time finishing artworks, completing them, and delivering them to patrons. He's actually more well known for his notebooks, his sketches, and he did a lot of this because, again, he was a man of learning. He loved to understand how things worked. He was one of the first people who did dissection in order to understand how the body worked. And that was something that actually got him in a lot of trouble with the church, actually. So he did things that sometimes people didn't understand, but he was on the cusp. He was on the forefront of understanding and knowledge, so he just didn't really care. He actually used mirror writing, so he actually wrote backwards to protect his information. He was just extremely knowledgeable and inventive in how he approached life and learning. Some of the finished works we often talk about, of course, are the Virgin of the Rocks, the painting you see here. Famous for starting to consider composition a certain way and consider it in more of a realistic way. So you'll notice there's actually kind of a depth to this painting that you may have not seen in other paintings. There's a realism to it that you don't see in Botticelli's Birth of Venus. And there's stability to the composition using things like that popular figure triangle. If you start at the top of Mary's head, trace outward to the sides. You notice how it's a triangular composition. And we always say in art, triangles give you stability. It locks that composition in place and makes it very pleasing to the eye. There's no ambiguity to it. He also is one of the first people to use oil paint to create his artworks. And this was a new medium. Again, you can go back to look at the painting chapter and touch up on that there. Of course, one of his most famous pieces is The Last Supper. That is in the convent in Milan, and was actually in the dining space for the nuns there at Santa Maria del Grazia. So I always love to imagine the nuns, eating their breakfast and looking up at the image. And the image has always been problematic. He actually used a combination of oil paints and tempera paints. So, tempera paint wasn't really meant to go on walls, neither was oil. He should have just used the good old plain old fresco approach, but he didn't because he wanted to try something different. The outcome of him using these paints is that it's literally flaking off the wall. It's kind of coming off the wall and dissolving. And so this painting is always being conserved. It's always being touched up. They're always trying to stabilize it. So it's a problematic work, to say the least. Very problematic. But, again, we look at it and we talk about the kind of compositional elements you see here, which are truly very Renaissance. It's all about stability and order and control. And this is one of the first pieces where you see one point or linear perspective. And here's a diagram of that. And it's just what it sounds like. It's where all the lines converge to a vanishing point or a one point. So the lines linear converging to one point, right, vanishing point. And you use that in the composition to create stability. So again, you can go in and trace, right, and find your lines and see how everything converges with Christ. Notice he's a stable triangle, so just talking about the same type of compositional elements there. This painting is controversial for other reasons that I won't get into here. For our purposes, it's a little bit too much, I think. But again, you can read a lot of conspiracy theories about this painting. But the straightforward reading of it is it's just what it is. It's the Last Supper. And again, he's trying to represent it in a much more, again, Renaissance focused construction than we've seen in the past.